Hello there, welcome to the channel. This is Nerd World, and today we are going to be appreciating the goddess of love herself, Hathor. Not really so much of a goddess as an evil snake wrapped around the brain stem of an innocent woman, taking control of her body and enslaving her for countless millennia and forcing her to do her bidding. But that's the awesomeness that is the show of Stargate. The Goa'uld are one of the best movie villains. They really are nightmare fuel incarnate. Hathor is one of the more interesting ones, and we're going to look at her story today because she has a pretty complicated and weird history. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below. And with that said, let's get started on Hathor. Hathor, the Goa'uld that we know and love, literally many will love, was of course Ra's queen, but before she was truly Ra's queen, she had been a ruler in her own right, ruling over a human-like civilization who seemingly may have been a hermaphroditic race, and she used a sort of love potion to cast a spell over the people, Niktel. With this, the entire population of about 10 million individuals would fall in love with her. They would show her endless devotion, and in some ways she repaid that devotion. She encouraged sports, feasting, festivals, joy and laughter, all in her honor, of course, because she's a Goa'uld. And in return, she didn't aimlessly and indiscriminately massacre everyone, so a win. The first people that she would rule over lived on the planet which was her power base of Ta Netjar, and they were the Netjarians. As I said before, these were a humanoid, possibly human-like, possibly hermaphroditic species that she ruled over and would have likely taken hosts from. But Ra, disliking that his queen had created a power base for herself, possibly threatened by the fact that she could possibly become a rival, forced her to come live with him on Earth, abandoning that world, forcing the population of that planet to commit mass suicide and begin creating rituals to try and get her to come back. The exact fate of that civilization beyond this is then unknown. She is known in legend to be the mother of Hereward. This is very likely true, as Hathor herself was a Goa'uld queen. The Goa'uld are a bit like an ant colony or a beehive. Their species have queens and basically drones, with Ra and the other system lords basically being drones, but individuals such as Ageria and Hathor being queens. It is entirely possible that Ageria is actually the mother of Hathor, and Ra potentially the symbiote that fertilized her to then create Hathor, as Hathor in mythology is said to have been Ra's daughter. Gross. She also went by other names, notably Sekhmet. However, there were other Goa'ulds that went by the name of Sekhmet, and even Bastet had occasionally used the name. It's unknown if this was because Hathor did have multiple names or identities, or whether another Goa'uld was Sekhmet and somehow everything had got a little mixed up from a human point of view, which seems more likely, as the humans weren't really privy to everything the Goa'uld were and were not doing. Hathor had access to a drug which was a pheromone that had an ability to basically entrance men and make them loyal to her, but it didn't really work on women, which was a big failing really. That was the Nishta. Nishta could be sprayed on or anyway ingested or inhaled by men around her and would force them to become her willing slaves, with it being very difficult for them to overcome this control, although it was possible, but again it didn't work on most women. She had become trapped on Earth when she fell out of favor with Ra and was thrown out of Egypt, or possibly simply fled. She fled to another part of the planet as she was not able to get off world, and when the human rebellion happened, she was stranded on Earth in the Americas. There she continued to live as worshipped as a new goddess until there was another rebellion in the 4th century BC. Her priests rebelled against her because they didn't like how much control she had over the population and were fearful of her, but some of her priestesses, in order to as they would protect her, trapped her inside of her sarcophagus. This prevented her from coming back out, and from the year 332 BC, she stayed in her sarcophagus until 1997, when she was awakened inadvertently by archaeologists that dug up her sarcophagus, finding it very strange to find an Egyptian sarcophagi in the Americas. It should also be pointed out that the host that she emerged from had a rather interesting, if not tragic, backstory to the actual host herself. In many different cultures, Hathor had been introduced as different goddesses, such as Andromeda, or she may have even have been the inspiration for goddesses such as Aphrodite, due to the fact that she had the ability to entrance men with her beauty. There was a human queen who refused to pay tribute to Hathor. She believed that her armies would be strong enough to defeat the Jafar and would not pay tribute to Hathor at the festivals. Hathor, of course, being a Goa'uld, and this human local ruler not having any real comprehension of what they're up against, of course, was easily smashed and defeated, but for her insult. Hathor demanded her daughter as tribute. She would then take her daughter as a host, with the woman's husband, or fiancé rather, attempting to rescue her to no avail, but thanks to her ability to entrance men, she would take her host's former fiancé and lover as her own concubine. Once accidentally awakened from her sarcophagi, she killed the archaeologists that had discovered her, and then, utilizing Goa'uld technology, not knowing the current state of the Goa'uld Empire or the state of Earth, she used the pieces of tech she had left around to home in on the largest source of Naquita she could detect, feasing that it would probably be the Stargate. She then walked over 1,000 miles, tricking and seducing her way across the American border, eventually walking up to Stargate Command, where she claimed to be an enemy of Ra. They initially believed she was just some crazy person, but she was quickly able to worm her way in using the Nishta pheromone that her body produced, which I always figured there must be a piece of technology bedded in her body somewhere, or she genetically modified the host, because no other Goa'uld queen ever demonstrated this ability. So she was able to do this, but as I said, it didn't work on women. After she took over the base, got all the men on her side, the women were locked away, but eventually rebelled, and under Major Carter, or Captain Carter I think it was then, they were able to retake the base and kill all of her newly spawned Goa'ulds that she was going to use to create a new army of Jafar, with O'Neill as her first prime, with the baby daddy being Dr. Jackson. Although it was only really that queens of the Goa'uld need a sampling of the host DNA in order to produce symbiotes that will be more compatible with the host species. Leaving Earth, she would make her way to Chulak, where she would begin to recruit Jafar to serve her. She would make her way to outer planets of the Goa'uld Empire, where she wouldn't be as noticed, getting Jafar, who were formerly loyal to her son, Heroer, and to Apophis and others, to follow her instead. Although Jafar are immune to the effects of her pheromone, she was still able to sway them to her cause, as she was an extremely adept liar and temptress in general, and would make endless promises. Whether or not she intended to keep them was irrelevant. She would say or do anything that would further her goals. She would eventually return to a planet called Jababli, which was a world that she had formerly created as a resource planet before she had been stranded on Earth. She learned that the human population of this world still worshipped her as a goddess, and she used it as a world to get hosts and even create a new Jafar. She would also extend onto a couple of other planets, going as far as to create new Jafar and use humans as cannon fodder in her attempts to rebuild her power base and reascend to the rank of System Lord. But she was very careful not to challenge any of the major Goa'ulds yet, as she hadn't built up enough forces, not just in terms of manpower, but she also needed Hataks and other resources in order to not just simply be stomped out of existence or end up as one of their concubines, as she had done before with Ra. She hated and resented Ra, and had often sought a way to destroy him herself, so she was not exactly sore to see him gone. In spite of how far Hathor managed to go, she could only go so far. Without being able to challenge the system laws directly and without a decent intelligence network, she was still vulnerable. So she hatched an elaborate plan when she was able to capture SG1 and other members. She had built an elaborate deception on one of her planets, a fake SGC. Now, she didn't fully know what the SGC looked like. She made it out that this SGC was decades in the future, and that Colonel O'Neill and his team had been in cryogenic suspension for that long while they were being treated. They were then being debriefed in this new alternate future as her Goa'ulds posing as SGC personnel attempted to gather information from the team and thus allow her to learn more about the Goa'uld, possibly from a different perspective, a sort of an unbiased third party who could tell her exactly what the disposition of Goa'uld were like and where their weak points were, and possibly another way of even attacking them. But all this would be for nothing, despite the elaborate deception and how clever it all was. Hathor was discovered when O'Neill, feigning unconsciousness, overheard several of the human doctors talking in Goa'uld to one another. As a result, he was able to escape, locate the rest of his teammates, and from there defeat her wicked plan. But before they could, and they escaped to the gate room, they were recaptured by Hathor, and a symbiote was implanted into O'Neill. But unbeknownst to Hathor, one of her Goa'uld was actually a Tok'ra agent who saved O'Neill by cryogenically freezing him quickly before the symbiote could take control, resulting in the death of said symbiote, and O'Neill then living to kill Hathor another day being actually later that day, finally ending Hathor as a threat to the galaxy and even to the other Goa'ulds for that matter, and destroying her fledgling empire, which would rapidly be absorbed by other Goa'ulds such as Apophis. And there we have Hathor, fascinating Goa'uld who had great power and ability, highly intelligent, manipulative, seductive individual, but ultimately fell to the same failing that all Goa'uld did, underestimating humans, being overconfident and arrogant, and generally showing what a ruthless, vicious creature she could be when she really didn't need to, and she could have simply used her pheromones. I also do question this in this last outing, why she didn't just implant symbiotes in them all in the first place. It could be that she didn't trust what the symbiotes would tell her once they'd taken control of the hosts, or it could have been that she didn't have enough or any were ready. Who knows? There could be a number of reasons why she didn't just do what she'd done before and seduce O'Neill with her pheromones and make him and Daniel Jackson make them tell her everything they knew. There were storyline reasons for it, but ultimately it boiled down to contrivance. But all the same, fascinating character, beautiful woman that portrayed her, and a fantastic and interesting villain that I think they didn't necessarily do justice to. I thought that they could have got a lot more out of Hathor. I really love the Goa'uld as antagonists in Stargate in general, and Hathor for me was kind of not a missed opportunity. I think she was used very well, and she was used sparingly. Perhaps maybe if they had used her more, it wouldn't have been as good, but I found her to be a very memorable villain and a very fascinating one, with her use of sort of coming at you sideways tactics rather than head on, which was much more the Goa'uld way. They were much more Anubis-y, like they just bombard you from orbit and blow shit up until you surrendered, and then they forcibly enslave you. She showed the other side of the Goa'uld, where how they interacted with humans on a day-to-day level, how humans would come to understand Goa'uld mythology, and how the Goa'uld did need humans on some level. They couldn't just have their empire and not have humans be part of it. They still needed humans at a base level, literally the base level of the empire. But she showed that, I hesitate to say human touch the Goa'uld could have, but the way the Goa'uld could touch the lives of humans in a not overly negative way every time. As it was pointed out that Yu Wang Shang sometimes even had positive influences and changes upon some of the worlds that he ruled. He might, like any other Goa'uld, have stopped them progressing technologically too much, but he didn't necessarily force them to live wretched, horrible lives. They could still live comfortably, and it was the same under Hathor. She wanted to be loved, then perhaps she shouldn't have been such an evil creature. So, anyway, with all that said, what do you think of Hathor? And are there any other Goa'ulds that you really like? Or maybe were the Goa'uld not the be-all and end-all villain for you? Maybe it was the Ori or the Replicators. Let me know in the comments below, as I will expand on this series. I know I don't do a lot of Stargate videos, and I really should, because I bloody love Stargate. And Hathor really was one of my favourite villains from that show. But, as I said, that brings us to the end of this video, and the life and trials and tribulations of Hathor, who just, I suppose, couldn't cut it in the new era. Maybe Ra had a point and she needed to be by his side, because on her own she only lasted 2 years. If you made it all to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.